The Hunger Games, Squid Game, or the superior Battle Royale from Japan are dark, killer-be-killed aspects of fiction. Battle Royales have had a decent influence on pop culture over the past decades and altered how we look at entertainment. The recent Purge movies are a little more abstract. Then there's The Running Man, Death Race, The Condemned, Kill Theory, Gamer, and many, many more. I really could go on for some time, but they had nothing on Nazino Island. And Nazino Island actually took place in the real world. In the 1930s, Stalin was busy conducting brutal purges of anyone and everyone that said stuff he didn't like or didn't think the way that he wanted them to think. Stalin would ruthlessly eliminate anyone who challenged his new social order, which meant entire classes of people were on the chopping block, as well as anyone with their own opinions or free thought. Joseph Stalin and the communists would murder vast millions of innocent people. But in March 1933, the Soviet leader was presented with a whole new type of gulag to oppress the masses. Stalin was shown a plan to get rid of 2 million political deplorables. And Stalin, always down for new ways to oppress the innocent, eagerly approved the project. The political prisoners would be sent to Siberia and Kazakhstan in autonomous communities that would be self-sufficient, with a bonus to the Soviets because they could use it for propaganda saying the victims were settlers of a new land for the benefit of the Soviet Union as a whole. Russia had been starving for some time from famine thanks to failed communist policies, so it would be beneficial to get rid of some mouths to feed that could cause political dissent in the motherland. So, in that same year of 1933, the first batch of victims was rounded up and forced onto trains to their final destination at the frozen Siberian island of Nazino. Off an icy marshland in Siberia, the local Ostyak people were the only ones ever to visit the island that would become the gulag. It was more a swamp than an actual island. Nazino was in the middle of frozen waters with no buildings or food or anything. It would get its name from a local village by the same name. However, Nazino is not the name the locals call the island. The Ostyak call it Cannibal Island, and I'm sure you can guess why. It was estimated the colony would struggle, but in the end, take around 2 years to establish self-sufficiency. However, in communist Russia, no one ever wanted to take blame for anything that might possibly go wrong, so people in the party who had bad news often were seen as the bad news themselves, and relieved of life through firing squads. Hence, communication and efficiency were rare, and the Nazino colony would be a horrific failure. The victims were thrown into something they were not prepared for in the slightest, and the Soviets in charge of the Gulag were the very definition of incompetence, corruption, and depravity. The first batch of these people that they wanted gone were rounded up and forced into trains. There were around 6,200 political dissidents in total in this first batch, but by the time that they reached Nazino Island, they were already suffering greatly, with 27 people dead from the trip alone. Most people lost their few valuable items to thugs on the train ride through Siberia. Hope was all but gone by the time they were put on boats and taken to the island, but that small amount of hope that still endured would be squashed soon enough because their descent into hell had just begun. The undesirables were pushed out of the ship into the wilderness. It didn't take long for the players in this game of death to realize just how screwed they truly were. The island was supposedly a labor camp, but there were no farms, tools, shelter, or anything. The political prisoners were immediately at the mercy of the elements. Close to 300 froze to death the very first night. It's safe to assume that the older Gulag prisoners died first, but only the hardiest would last very long. Flour was the only resource that the Soviets had sent the guards, and they passed it out, but the starving people swarmed them, and the guards got trigger-happy, shooting into the crowd to send a message. The next day, the guards again resorted to shooting at the crowds. That is, until a better system of a single person from each group was ordered to get the flour. However, one of the issues was that these people singled out to get the flour were thugs who muscled their way into the position and abused their new power immediately to the extreme. And the prisoners having only flour, some tried mixing it with river water, only to get dysentery and die. A miasma of pestilence spread among the victims with incredible speed and virulence. Desperate people attempted to leave the island by making crude crafts, only for their corpses to wash back up on Nazino's shore not long after. However, some did make it across, but the guards let them go because they were as good as dead going into the Siberian wilderness without any resources. Other guards would hunt and kill these escapees for sport. Everyone who tried to leave was never heard from again, and it took only a couple of days for the island to be littered with dead bodies. But despite this, the Soviets kept bringing more and more political dissidents to the island, despite being fully aware of the horror that was going on. Again, they didn't want to give any superior bad news, even as rumors of cannibalism began to spread among the communists in charge of the gulag. The snow and freezing winds, along with weakness from starvation, led to people being so exhausted that they actually burned alive while sleeping by their fires at night. Exhaustion and cold killed many more than the bullets of the Soviet guards, who'd walk around the island's perimeter and shoot anyone they came across to send a message to everyone else. With nothing to cook the flour with, there are reports of some even choking to death by accident, inhaling it from their weak, fumbling desperation. If someone found something to eat, they'd be quickly murdered. People did what they wanted, with who they wanted, with little regard to anything but their own animalistic urges. As the island further descended into a maelstrom of madness, it was kill or die. The remaining survivors basically started living a real-life battle royale, or Squid Games at this point. They were dead if they escaped, and they were most likely dead if they stayed, so the only option was to give up any semblance of humanity if they wanted a chance at survival. Violent maniacs quickly took over, and the Soviet guards could not control anything, not really, so the brutes were free to do whatever horrific acts they wanted. These thugs stole anything that was possibly useful, leading to more starvation and murder day by day. But the guards, too, were quick to execute victims mercilessly for the most mundane and menial reasons. Tribalism became the only aspect of life, and violent exchanges between factions constant. By the end of the first week, cannibalism was no longer a rumor. It was widespread. The island was a horrific real-world Hunger Games, and with Nazino Island as far away from civilization as you could get, there was no hope any of them would ever get out of this game alive. People would be held down and have their calves cut off, then left for dead. One survivor, when later asked if he ate people, said he did not. He'd only ever eaten livers and hearts of the others. The man talked about how he and his gang made skewers out of tree branches and cooked human organs over campfires many times. But they'd never eaten human meat, like that meant anything after killing someone and eating their internal organs.
I picked those who were not quite living, but not quite dead. It was obvious they were about to go, that in a day or two they'd give up, so it was easier for them that way. Now, quickly, without suffering for another 2 or 3 days.
In 1989, an old Ostyak woman who was 13 years old during these harrowing events was interviewed. Her tribe had lived in the area for what seemed like eons, and they'd visited the island many times in the past, but it had always been uninhabited. However, in 1933, when they visited, the woman said that they were surprised to find bodies everywhere. She told the story of a girl who was sent there, who was taken as a lover by a Soviet guard. The girl was abducted in his absence by some now insane island prisoners. They tied her to a tree, then cut off all edible meat from her body while she was still alive. After it was over, the Ostyak woman's group visiting the island tried to save the girl, but she'd lost too much blood. The interview is disturbing to the extreme. It shows how any humanity that the Gulag prisoners had quickly left them in a bid for survival. Once word finally got back to the higher-ups about all the insanity, the Soviets were baffled. It took a single month for this settlement to be officially closed, and the higher-ranking officers were utterly disgusted at the cannibalism and horrors that took place on the island. But still, in the end, only a handful of guards were ever put in jail or punished for any of this. and the entire incident was forbidden to be brought up to public knowledge. The Soviets tried their best to bury it and hide it from history. 4,000 people had died in the most horrifying ways possible, with the survivors simply being shipped to the next gulag after Nazino shut down. The Soviet Union created a literal hell on earth and authored one of the most depraved chapters from the annals of all humankind's history. But history repeats if it's not remembered, and suffering cannot be overcome if not looked at. These poor victims' suffering should be kept close to conscious memory in all people as a warning of authoritarian collectivism and total government power.